Okay. This next question is a sensitive topic. If you do not feel comfortable answering it, that is totally fine. Do you feel that colorism often plays
Yes.
a part? Okay, you knew I was going. I didn't have to. Okay.
1000%, yes.
Okay.
It's interesting because now we're able to have these kind of conversations, whereas before people kind of just didn't talk about it, right? So there's been this aesthetic that's been pushed down everybody's throat, and not just within our community as it pertains to colorism, but as a whole. And so just to set it plainly, the idea and notion is that anything that is closer to the European aesthetic of beauty is what's going to be accepted. So anything outside of that is looked at as less than and not as marketable. So I feel like we're just now starting to see people, I don't want to say just now, but we're seeing a lot more people resist that notion and actually speak out against it, instead of just like this being this kind of hush conversation that we have, on platforms like The Sun or around a dinner table with our friends and family members. Like, we've seen it, and we've seen it repeatedly in all areas of entertainment. In music, absolutely. For years and years and years, you only saw women that had lighter complexions and a certain texture of hair that were being promoted as these, beautiful singers. Anyone else wasn't really given the opportunity. Now it's a lot more diverse, thankfully, but it still needs work, and not just in music, in television and film too. Like, I remember doing an interview with Jenny Lumet, who's Lena Horne's granddaughter, and now she's an exec, and she's still having, conversations like this, where people are bringing in only biracial people, or people that are ethnically ambiguous, to play roles, not because there's a specific part of their storyline that's tailored to having perhaps a white mother and a black father or something like that, but just because people have been so used to saying, okay, this is the pool of acceptable blacks that we can put in whatever product that we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And when people don't get called on that, it just continues to perpetuate that same,
absolutely,
that same notion. And it's just like, there's so many beautiful people in the world, and there's so many beautiful Black people. We need more than just one or two Lupita Nyong'os out there representing for people that don't look,
Yes. And so I just want to unpack on that a little bit more before we sign off. Do you feel, as a brown-skinned woman, that talking about these things, you get resistance from our lighter-skinned sisters who may not be able to realize that there is a privilege in being light-skinned? And it's not to say that they don't go through anything, but they may not understand. They might not see the privilege that they have. Just as a white person, may not understand that they do have a privilege being white.
I mean, I really feel like it. I feel like it depends, right? So I try not to speak in generalities as it pertains to how people approach these kind of topics, because it's hard. I think that there are some people that are in denial about the fact that we still live in a very in a society that is founded in white supremacy, right? That's not up for debate. It is what it is, right? So that being the case, knowing that colonialism is what it is and white supremacy is what it is, we've been taught, not just Black and brown people, but people all over the world that have had interactions with the effects of colonialism and white supremacy, those ideas and notions that anything that's white or white adjacent is better, those are ideas that have been promoted in every faction of media, in every form of entertainment since the beginning of entertainment and media, right? So understanding that, sometimes I think what happens with certain people is that there's some kind of guilt attached to feeling feeling like they're not a part of the system that has been oppressing so many of us. So what you get is resistance instead of understanding that, yes, we all have certain things that might align with privilege, but it doesn't mean that we don't also experience hardships. And by that, I'll say I'm a Black woman that's brown skinned with curly hair, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's certain things that that are benefits that I have that other people may not. And by that, I mean, I'm a person that has full autonomy and use of my body, right? I
Mm-hmm.
don't have to use a wheelchair to get around. I don't have any disabilities physically. So that's something that's a privilege that I have. Does it mean that I don't have hardships that other people don't? No, it just means that I have certain privileges. So I think if we can all get to the point of understanding that even if you do have privileges as a person of a lighter hue because of how our society is constructed, it doesn't make you any less Black, and it doesn't mean that you don't also experience hardships as a Black person. So I think if we can get to the point where people don't feel so inclined to be defensive about their Blackness, because that's like a whole nother conversation. I feel like um, a lot of brown and darker skinned Black people can also make our lighter brothers and sisters feel away or feel like they have to prove their Blackness. So like that's a whole nother conversation too.
Absolutely.
Contributes to why some people might be resistant to the fact that like there is light skin privilege, like that's a thing. But it doesn't mean that you can't use that privilege and use the knowledge of knowing what it is to fight against it to get us on, you know, more of a level playing field. And I'm hoping that more of us, I think we're getting there, but I'm hoping
Yeah.
more of us understand that and we can just work together as a collective because we're all Black, like living this
Absolutely.
experience in America, which is nuts.
Absolutely.
And if you're a woman, it's like you're Black and you're a woman. So you have these two things that you're like fighting to.
I know. Well, you know, Carissa, that was the most beautiful explanation I've heard on this whole conversation. So I want to thank you for that. It was beautifully stated, and I think it'll spark a conversation, and people can feel comfortable coming to the table to talk about it. You're right, because I think people just don't feel comfortable because it's such a sensitive topic that goes left.
It's a sensitive topic. And you probably have had experiences. I know I've had experiences where I was on set, and there was one experience where I was on set and a producer, it was like the middle of summer and it was like 100 degrees. I'm not straightening my hair. Like I'm not. It's 100 degrees outside. I'm not straightening my hair. And so I go in the studio and this producer who happened to be white is like patting my hair down to try to like tame it, so to speak. And it's like all those little microaggressions. I've had other cameramen say stuff to me like, oh, I guess we have to use the stronger light today. Like we've all had these micro and macroaggressions, you know, that we experience as Black people or Black women in these certain spaces.
Right.
But just because someone is lighter doesn't mean that they don't also experience, you know, things.
So let's unpack a bit because you're so good at explaining these things. Does it hurt more when the colorism comes from within your own community? And I hate to even bring this up, but hip hop and R&B is notorious for colorism. They are notorious for having dark skinned women on set, but they will never be the lead. I mean, I think it's sad that probably within the last 2 decades or so, for major artists, you probably can at least or barely count on one hand how many dark skinned Black women leads they have had. And I have been informed of stories where dark skinned women were on sets and they got into the scene and the whole set was shut down because they just have them there to say we invited dark skinned people, but they really dark skinned women, but they really didn't want dark skinned women in the frame. So does it hurt when most of the challenges, you know, it's coming from within? You know, I would like to. We wish I could say it's only the white people that are doing this, but it's happening a lot within us in our community.
It's not. I think to a certain degree, not to a certain degree, yes, I do think it hurts more coming from within our community because I feel like because all of us have experienced some of these hardships as it pertains to racism and colorism, we shouldn't then be turning around and perpetuating it and putting that same, putting those same feelings of questioning our worth and inadequacy onto each other. Right. And, you know, like I've had people say to me like, oh, you're really beautiful for a Black girl.
Oh yeah, I still hear that. You're pretty. I hear that from
the most beautiful Black woman I've ever seen, and I've never been attracted to Black women. But then the flip side of that is like, oh, I don't usually date brown skinned women, but you're really beautiful for a brown skinned girl. Like, and when you think about that framing and like just that mentality, it's like, so in your mind, brown or dark skin is somehow not beautiful, and you've said that this person or me in this particular instance is an exception to that rule, like, let's unpack that. Like, what is that? How does that mean that you feel about yourself as a Black person if you feel like Black or brown skin somehow is less beautiful than light or white skin? Like, what does that mean? And there have been lots of these conversations. We've had, you know, those documentaries. I know they did the documentary called Dark Girls, where they had a lot of brown and dark-skinned women talk about these horrible experiences that they had growing up, being told that they weren't beautiful, like they weren't enough, or that they were just over sexualized, or, you know, looked at as anything less than, you know, beautiful Black queens. And so I think, you know, seeing that paired also with the misogyny that is hip hop, like,
there
are rappers and hip hop artists that I think have kind of pushed back. There's one video I can think of that I remember being surprised when I saw it, and it made me happy. I think it was for the song Frontin' by Pharrell.
Okay.
There was a really beautiful brown skinned woman who was one of like the lead love interests. It was her and Lauren London. But I remember seeing it and being like, wow, like she's so beautiful. Why do we not see more of women that look like her in these videos? Like, and eventually it got better, but even still, like, there's still these stupid team dark skin, team light skin, team brown skin conversations that are being had within our communities. And it's exhausting to me when I see it. We're all Black. Stop.
Yeah, and it's funny because as you were talking about this, 99.9% of Black men or African American men that approach me, they always say, "Oh, you're so beautiful for a dark skinned girl." It's like normal. I can probably count my hands the times that brothers have not said that to me. So I don't address it because, like you said, it's exhausting. And maybe it's a blessing that a person shows you what their mindset is. But if that's the way they think and they're saying this publicly, you're pretty for a dark skinned girl, and they really think it's a compliment.
That's the part. But you know, I started addressing it though.
Imagine what they're bringing. Imagine the bias that they're bringing to their workplace. If they're the Black women in public, oh, you're so.
But I started addressing it because I just feel like, as exhausting as it is, like, let this be a teachable moment. Like, let's unpack it, because I find that for a lot of people, and this is not everybody, some people are just dense on purpose. They're intentionally obtuse, and it's like, okay, if that's what you're choosing to be, fine. But for some people, I don't think they've thought about it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I really don't feel like they've done the work to try to unpack, like, well, why would I say something like that? Like, what's the root of it? Was it something that they heard someone say to them as a kid that they've internalized and taken with them through life? You know what I mean? Because a lot of that stuff is passed down. And then if you look at the history of colorism for us, if we're just going to talk about it, a lot of that is rooted in people's ability to survive. It's not just for the sake of thinking that, I mean, part of it is this idea that anything white is better, but also for a lot of Black people, you got better jobs if you were lighter, if you were closer to white, if you were able to pass, or members of your family were able to be just on the cusp where they're not really sure, you might have gotten an opportunity for education or a job that allowed you to provide for your family.
Yes.
So a lot of those ideals were passed down generationally because that was their means of being able to survive. So when you really start to unpack that and think about like, oh, okay, so this is what the root is. But now that we're not there, how do we move away from it? A lot of people are just not thinking about it in those terms. They're just regurgitating things that they've heard their whole life and they don't even know why. So I like calling people on it. Like, well, why did you say that? What made you say that?
Yeah.
Like, what makes you feel like anything black or brown is somehow less beautiful? Like, what makes you feel that way? And sometimes it sparks a conversation where people can reflect and, like, you know, grow from those moments. Sometimes it doesn't, but I feel like the more we have these kind of conversations, the more we can try to get away from these just ridiculous mindsets that don't do anything but keep us in bondage.
Perfectly said. Perfectly said. So I want to thank you for this special segment